What? This is John Cola with GrowingYourGreens.com. I have another exciting episode for you. And this one's gonna be a fun one. Actually, there's a viewer named Mike who actually emailed me a video with a bunch of questions. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you guys is Mike's predicament and why he lost hundreds of plants potentially. And my suggestions on how he can prevent this from next time. As you guys know as gardeners, things don't always go right. I mean, do 100% of my plants live all the time? Matter of fact, I just lost 2 over there because actually I overwatered. But I think like 30 of them made it, but I lost 2. But that's all right. Are you gonna let the 2, oh, I lost 2 plants, get you down? No, man, screw it. Don't worry about it. I'm using the soil in there to put in a new batch and grow some new plants. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So let's hear from Mike and hear about his story and what's going on and how I could help him with that. So let's go to that clip.
Hey John, this is Mike, and I want to thank you very much for taking your time to check out this video and giving me some gardening advice. First up, I'm going to be sharing with you what I did first with my gardening. About like March or April, I started sprouting them inside. I did tomatoes, a whole bunch of different herbs, and I sprouted them in this tray, this heated tray. I don't know if you recommend these, and I used these to sprout them up with.
All right, Mike, so it looks like you got a couple things right. Number one, especially if you're growing tomatoes when it's still cold out, you want to use something like the heat mat, keep it warm for your babies. If you can't afford a heat mat, I think they're like 20 to 30 bucks. Maybe even somewhere kind of a little bit warm like the top of your refrigerator can be used to germinate some plants. The other thing you're using, because you have those little trays, I'd recommend instead of putting the peat pellets in the trays, which can get quite expensive. And the other thing about the peat pellets, they have this netting on here, and you want to rip off this netting before you plant the plants, because if you leave the netting on, it's going to stunt your plant's growth. They say the roots are supposed to grow through this. I have seen that it still does hinder root growth, although it can grow through this stuff. But if you have those little planting trays like you do, you want to get what's called a sterile soil medium, and this is what's optimal in my opinion. So we got this stuff right here. This is actually called the Pro Mix, and basically this is like a peat moss and some perlite mixed in here. This is basically just something that's going to hold the water so that your plants can germinate. So I mean, so far everything looks really good.
And the tomatoes did pretty good, but the herbs, they seem like they always kind of die in here. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with them. So, and tomatillas, those seem to die too. So
aside from that, you were doing it right. You had a little greenhouse thing, kind of like this thing right here, and I got some seeds that germinated and some that didn't. I think I need to transplant these guys out. It's important to have a nice cover or dome to keep the proper moisture level in there for your plants. Now it's also very important, as you said, some of your tomatoes made it, but your tomatillos and your herbs did not. Why did that happen? Well, probably the main thing is too much moisture or too little moisture. Sounds like to me it's probably might be too much moisture. It's very important not to flood out your plants and not give them too much water. Many people might think, oh, I love my plants, let me give them more water, but they could drown like you could drown if you're tossed in a swimming pool and you're half drunk. You won't be able to breathe and you'll drown. So, I don't exactly know what happened in your specific situation, but I would encourage you to experiment. You successfully know how to germinate tomatoes now, so next time, do it a little bit differently with the tomatillos and the herbs to see if you could get them to grow as well.
But the tomatoes worked out pretty good. And then when they got pretty big, I switched them to these and to a bigger one too.
Moving on up. So you got that right, Mike. You want to definitely move your plants up as they kind of get too large and outgrow their containers. So I don't really have any baby plants right now, but I do have these guys here. Actually, I bought these little plant starts. These are little pepper plants I bought for 69 cents on clearance in little like 3.5-inch containers. Now once I got these home, what I did was immediately moved them up. And I moved them up into like 1-gallon containers. So actually I think these were bought at 2 different points, but I still need to move this guy up. But as soon as you can, you want to move your plants up into a larger container so that it'll give them a larger home to grow in. And that's definitely very important. So you might be moving these up into larger containers inside your house before you bring them outside. So depending on the crop and when you're going to plant outside, I might recommend, 1, 2, 3, moving it up 3 times, like moving it up out of that little 6-pack size tray you had into a 4-inch, and then let it grow inside more, and then finally move it into the gallon. Once you move it into the gallon, you should probably plant it out in the gallon. I don't like to really plant things out in larger than gallon size in my garden personally. But it all depends on your timing. If your weather's nice enough to plant them out now, you want to plant them out without moving them up into the larger container if at all possible.
And I'll show you what I got in the garden right now. So look over. So what I did here, I rototillered the garden. It was really hard. I know you mentioned before that you shouldn't rototill or anything, but the ground was so hard I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't really. It seemed, you know, it just seemed like that's what I had to do. If you can make a video about why I shouldn't rototiller, that'd be awesome. I didn't really catch that the last time I saw you.
Ah, you rototill, dude. What are you thinking? All right, so rototilling, in my opinion, is like a last resort if you can't do anything else. I'm not a big fan of rototilling. Why you don't want to rototill is, you know, I'm mixing up some soil in my wheelbarrow here, and, you know, say this is nice, hard, compacted soil, or say it's been like sitting in the garden forever. It's like inside your house, right? You have a nice house, your bedrooms, and, you know, in the places, all the furniture's in there, and the drawers are in there. Say some criminals ransacked your house and they're looking for stuff. They're gonna come in your house, pull out the drawers, look for the money, the cash in your drawers, rip your bed up, pull all clothes out of your closet and throw them all over the floor. And it'll be all like discombobulated, right? When you rototill the soil, grrr, like you're rototilling the soil, it's totally messing up the soil structure, right? You might be chopping up earthworms in there. You're gonna definitely be destroying fungal hyphae, which is like the network of fungus in the soil. You're gonna definitely be disturbing the microbes and the bacteria in there that are definitely part of the soil. So by basically rototilling, you're gonna disturb the soil and basically create an imbalance. Like if thieves came through your house and tried to ransack it, you know, you wouldn't like to come home from thieves ransacking your house. It'd be a mess and you'd have to clean that shit up before you could live your life. And that's basically what the soil has to now basically rebuild itself before plant life will fully thrive in there. Another reason for not rototilling is because, you know, you had some grass down there, look like, and once you rototilled it, you made just you know, some ground, and now the ground is a prime opportunity. You know, an open ground is a prime opportunity for weeds to grow and things to grow in. So you might have dug up uncovered seeds when you're rototilling, or now seeds could drop in and start to grow, and, you know, now because you rototilled, you know, weeds are going to grow there. So that's definitely not a good thing. So what I recommend instead of rototilling is I recommend what's called sheet mulching. So let me demonstrate that. So what I would have done instead in your situation is, and it's gonna be a lot easier, you don't have to rent a rototiller or buy a rototiller to do this. Say this is the grass, say we have the grass right here. You're just gonna take cardboard and you're gonna lay the cardboard on top of the grass. And then on top of the cardboard, you're gonna build your raised bed garden. Now I like raised bed gardening because you can control what's going in there, what's in the soil. When you're just growing in rototilled dirt or soil in your backyard, you don't know the kind of nutrition in there, you don't know if it's the right pH, you don't know pretty much anything, and you're kind of gambling if it's gonna work or not. And yes, you can do it. If you do choose to do that, definitely recommend getting a soil test and adding some good organic, you know, compost, organic matter, and also the trace minerals and also the soil microbiology into there. But I would much rather somebody, especially if they're first time new into gardening, build a raised bed, because you're gonna have a much higher level of success without all the headaches, and then you wouldn't have made this video so that I could answer it for you. So you're gonna sheet mulch and just put cardboard over the ground, and, you know, all the way where you're gonna build your raised bed. Then you're gonna simply take some wood, some stones, some wine bottles turned upside down in the ground and stuck together, and basically form a frame. So you're gonna have edges on it like a frame. And, you know, wood is the easiest thing. You could go to Home Depot or Lowe's, they'll even cut it for you. Get some nice 2x6, 2x8, or 2x12, and, you know, make a frame. And then you're gonna put soil on top of the cardboard that you're gonna bring in, and you're gonna do what's called a Mel's mix.
Also, I didn't really do anything with the dirt. There's a couple things that I know you recommended. Pretty much I just, I had some dirt from last year. So I expected that it would be fine.
You didn't do nothing with the dirt! Dude, what are you thinking? All right, man, so there's a really good movie called Dirt the Movie. Check it out if you haven't seen it. But, you know, there's more to dirt than just dirt. I mean, to me, this is soil. Soil, to me, is life. I mean, literally, you become the soil. Think about that. You become the soil. Whatever you eat is coming out of the soil. That becomes you, and at the end, you know, you become the soil. So, soil is life, because everything that you're eating is coming from the soil, including if you're eating animals. Animals got fed on food produced in the soil. So everything comes from the soil. So soil is the key thing you want to remember in your garden. You know, much like if you want to build muscles and you're working out, you're not going to build muscles if you just, hopscotch or walk around or just sit in front of the computer all day, right? You know that to build muscles, you got to put some, exercise into it. So just like that, you need to work on building your soil because it is that important to grow high quality vegetables, much like lifting weights to build your muscles so you can be strong. I like to just huff compost bags around myself. But nonetheless, you get the idea. Soil is super critical, super important. So when you fill up your raised beds or when you're gonna grow food, you wanna invest in the soil. You wanna dedicate the most amount of money to your soil. Matter of fact, I spent half the money in my front yard garden to bring in like almost $1,000 worth of soil. And I'm even thinking, man, you spent $1,000 on soil, John? Yes, it's that important, man. And check it out. You buy the soil pretty much once, and I have to buy a little bit of soil every here and there. But once I made that one investment, I could grow food for years and years and years on that one investment. In my opinion, spending $1,000 or close to $1,000 on the soil one time is a much better investment than putting $1,000 in the bank. Because I guess with the rate of interest these days, I probably would have only made, I don't know, 20 bucks. But meanwhile, I'm growing thousands of dollars of produce that money can't buy, high quality produce at that, in my garden. So you want to get a good soil. So, in my opinion, I'm mixing up this soil here and I'm putting a whole bunch of different ingredients in there. I'm putting things like the rock dusts, the mycorrhiza. I'm using some of the John and Bob's products, the soil optimizer to put some nutrients in my soil. I have other videos where I talk more about the soil. I'm not going to get specifically into that, but I always encourage you guys to use, plant-based derived compost. So many composts may be derived from animal manures. And I like to look at nature for answers. Like if we're in a forest, all the trees would be dropping their leaves and all those leaves would be on the forest floor and they would compost down into mulch and then they'd finally break it down into compost. And the animals would be running by and they'd be pooping and stuff, but the majority of the compost at the forest floor is from decayed plant matter with some animal manures in there. Unfortunately, many composts you may buy at the store are derived from animal manures because it's literally somebody else's shit they're giving to you, and I don't like dealing with anybody else's crap aside from my own. So I think the plant matter is a much better way to get compost. Number one, in the Mel's mix is what you're gonna mix up and put in your raised beds are three things. Number one, the compost, which we talked about. Number two, you want to use a coconut coir or peat moss. That's gonna hold some water, and then finally you want to use some vermiculite. Those three things are available at most nursery centers, big box stores that you can put in addition to what Mel's mix. Then I'd recommend a few more things. Number one, I like the worm castings, very important. Number two, I like some kelp meal. And number three, I'm gonna say today, azomite or rock dust or the trace minerals. That's a probably critical factor that you want to use above anything else I've said besides those three ingredients, the rock dust. You want to add the trace minerals back into the soil. In addition, you also want to add the soil biologics. Soil biologics are like when I use the compost tea, the Boogie Brew, or something like the John and Bob's stuff here. You want to check a video I did that the title was like lowest price for compost tea and rock dust delivered. Of course, I also want to say that if you don't buy all these things, plants will still grow. I mean, look, your grass was growing there for years and now you're planting a garden, but it's not growing as well. Now, why is that? Well, I'm not there to see your soil, see what's going on with it, but I could only say, you want to get a soil test. Some plants and things will grow in certain soils when they won't grow in others. Tomatoes in general probably need a little bit more nutritious soil than what a grass would require, for instance. So you want to get it all dialed in. So you could ask your local university for a soil test if you choose not to bring in your own soil, because that is optional. You don't need to build a raised bed. You don't need to bring in your own soil. It just can be a little bit more complex to figure out what you got, what you need to do to make it work for you. And yes, you mentioned add in some peat moss. I don't know if that's going to help in your situation for what you got right now. What I would recommend is bringing in some organic compost, maybe a little bit of a peat moss too, and trying to duplicate that mixture and now trying to mix it in the top of the soil around the roots. And because your tomatoes made it, you can actually pile that up on the tomatoes, up the stalk, and actually bury them a little bit, and actually they'll root more, so they'll actually have good nutrition, despite the maybe poor nutrition below. Also, I don't know the quality of your soil. Is it clay? Is it sand? Most places unfortunately do not have the optimal soil type for growing vegetables. Depends on where you live, of course. So that's why, once again, I like to build in a raised bed that's isolated, so I'm bringing in the soil so I exactly know what's the plants are growing in, so I can have the utmost level of success.
So I put them in, and then the next day I water them really good, and then the next day I come back and they're laying flat on the ground like they're almost dead. So I was wondering, and half of them, I would say half of them, well, about 75% of them survive. Is there any way you could make a video of like how, if you have a problem like this, how do you revive your plants?
Revive your plants? What do you think, I could take my plants and give it mouth to mouth? It's not gonna work to revive your plants, man. Once your plants are down, like wilted out, they might come back, but if they're really out, down and out, they're gone. I mean, I do know you can revive people, their heart stops and stuff, but you don't want that to happen to you, so eat healthy to avoid all that stuff. Let's talk about what you probably didn't do that you didn't mention about bringing plants from inside to outside. Say you're in the middle of winter in Chicago, right? It's cold. I was there this winter actually, you know, walking around in the snow. And maybe inside a building it's nice and warm, then you go outside, you're shocked by the cold, or like jumping into a cold swimming pool, the perfect example, right? Like, do you like to just cannonball into that swimming pool if it's totally cold? No, you're like, oh, you'll freeze, you'll get cold. But then once you're past that initial shock, right, it's all good, right? What I like to do is maybe tiptoe slowly into the pool, and I mean really slowly. I take a long time to get into a pool or any kind of cold body of water. And, you know, I'll get in really slow, so, you know, I'm more adjusted to that. And we need to also do that with our plants. We can't just take this and throw it in the swimming pool, or take it from inside where it's nice and warm to outside where it could be colder, or it could be windier, or it could be more arid, could be more wet. We need to basically do what's called hardening off our plants. Now, hardening off is not what happens to you after you've done making love to your special person, but it's like taking your plants off and basically making sure they're hard. Like right before you're gonna get it on with your special person. But you wanna make sure they're hard so that they can handle the elements outside. So there's a few ways you can harden things off. So, you know, what I've done here is I'm underneath a shady tree here. Just took a large pot here and set a pallet on it actually. And on top of the pallet I just have my plants growing. So I have my plants underneath the big shade of the tree. So it's not like direct sun. You know, I don't know if you planted in direct sun, that could also be a problem, you know, because plants get shocked. So I like to take my plants from inside to outside in stages. You know, here's some other methods you can do besides bringing them out underneath some shade, and deep shade, not just mild shade, but deep shade. At least they could get adjusted to the climate outside while not being in full sun. You might want to maybe bring your plants out for a couple hours each day. You know, maybe the first day bring them out for 2 hours, let them get some sun, but then bring them back inside so they're kind of adjusting to the different climate element outside. Another method you might do is, you know, sometimes I might bring them out underneath a big awning and kind of let them stay there in the shade and just leave them there. You know, depending on how old your plant starts are, like baby plants, like some of these guys back here that are literally just like little seedlings, you know, still coming up. These guys can be much more affected, you know, more easily by the weather than something that's, you know, much more established, like one of these perennial tree collards that I've propagated from cuttings. So you want to just, you know, harden off your plants. So bring them outside a couple hours each day, then bring them back inside, and keep doing that for a while, you know, to get them adjusted. Then finally leave them out underneath something shady like I am here.
And how do I stop I have some watermelon growing in my my other garden, and I found that I put them in the ground and they die like almost the next day. Is there any tips to prevent transplant shock?
So my tips for preventing transplant shock. Number one, you want to move things on up, like I talked about earlier, you know, out of the little small cells, move them up to a little 4-inch, and then maybe even up to a gallon, and then plant them out. You know, the more established the plant is, the less it's going to be prone to shock. Little baby plants, you know, like little babies, are more prone to being shocked than, you know, something that's nice, big, and strong. Especially like, imagine punching a baby in the stomach. I mean, I don't recommend doing that. Or imagine, you know, Mike, I could punch you in the stomach and you're tight, man, and you're just taking But that's like your plants. Your plants are fragile when they're young. So, you know, like this eggplant's pretty hardened off because it's just so mature and it's already been living outside for a while, and I just need to, you know, plant it in like this raised bed that I'm gonna do probably in just a little bit. So the next thing you wanna do when transplanting is you wanna minimally disturb the roots. Say we're gonna transplant this little guy, we'll pull this guy out, and check this out, man. This is pretty dang root bound in there. You don't wanna damage the roots too much, you know, because this is root bound. I would actually pick this a little bit actually, and pick out these roots so that they're not gonna continue to wrap around. I'd probably put some mycorrhiza on there and then plant these guys out. The other thing you want to remember, if you're planting from pots, you know, right before you transplant, you want to water the pot very well, and then you want to pull them out, and then you want to plant it immediately. You don't want to like pull all 20 out and leave the roots, you know, exposed to the air, because if the roots dry out, that could be the end of those roots, and then the plant will have to regenerate its roots, which is not a fun thing. It's like you're trying to regenerate an arm if you had to. I don't know if I could or not. But anyways, you want to keep the roots moist. So once again, water before you pull it out, tease the roots out like, you know, you tease your hair in the 80s, and then I'd put some mycorrhiza on there, then I'd plant it in the raised bed, and then I'd water once again after I got it planted in there. Another thing you might want to do, depending on the size of the plant, to always help prevent transplant shock, if the plant has less leaves or less foliage, if you pulled off a couple, it may be more resistant to transplant shock. And I generally will do this with my tomatoes. All the lower branches I'll just pull out, and actually I'll bury the tomato, you know, maybe up to like this depth here. I also do that on my peppers. On my eggplants, I don't generally bury it deeper than where it's at. And my final method for preventing transplant shock is right after I plant it, I'll water it in. Maybe the next day I'll water it in with Boogie Brew compost tea. Boogie Brew compost tea, from my experience, helps prevent transplant shocks because it provides the nutrition that the plants need, and they'll actually also recover faster. So actually the bed right over yonder, I planted out, I watered it, and then the next day I treated it all with Boogie Brew. And as you guys can see, all these plants in here are doing really well. Now, when I planted these guys, they're kind of wilting down, and that leads me to another tip is, you know, don't plant in full sun. Like, try to avoid planting in full sun, especially tender leafy greens that are still rather young. These were planted from 6-packs right into the ground, which, depending on the age of them, I don't necessarily recommend. But I did it, and what I did was actually, because I planted in the full sun, the plants were instantly wilting. And when that happens, that's a warning sign to you. So what I did was I put a bamboo stake here in the middle, and I draped over a large shade cloth over this whole bed. It almost looked like a little circus tent in here. So I shaded these guys out like the first full day they're in, and then at night I took it off, and then they could kind of like adjust overnight to being here because they were actually underneath the shaded area. And then finally I treated them with Boogie Brew, and yeah, they were still folded over, but then finally they popped back and popped erect, and now, you know, I don't think I actually lost any plants doing that method. So, but in general, I recommend you plant not in the middle of the heat of the day, maybe more towards the afternoon, towards the evening, which would be my best time to plant, because then the plants could more adjust to the night cycle and then wake up in the morning after they've been in the ground for many hours.
And I have some peas that I sprouted indoors. I don't know if that was a bad idea because I put them in and they all died on me.
So Mike, sorry to hear about your peas that didn't make it. You know, some things can be started inside and, you know, transplant them out, but some things can be direct seeded in the garden. I always recommend you guys to direct seed whenever possible because it's a lot easier. Then you don't have to deal with the hassle of, you know, transplanting, moving things up and moving them out, hardening them off, because they're just in nature and they're going to germinate and grow in its place. And because they're just always going to be growing outside, then, you know, they're going to be accustomed to the weather outside because that's what they got to deal with it day in and day out. So direct seeding versus transplants, what's better? Well, some plants can be easily direct sown outside, such as the onions and the garlic that I have right over there. I just plant them from seed or from little bulbs and they grow. You know, things like the peas could totally be direct seeded outside. I mean, I have some direct seeded tomato plants coming up. I mean, one of the things besides direct seeding is letting plants go to flower and drop the seeds. You know, I grew tomatoes over in that bed over there, and I missed a couple tomatoes. They dropped, and the seeds burst out, and they stayed in the soil until the following summer, and now they're coming up. Or, you know, I have cilantro, you know, that went to flower and seed, drop seeds, and now it's coming up. You know, I have tree collards that drop seeds, and now they're coming up. So I really like the direct seed method because, you know, especially when the plants are dropping the seeds, they just have to grow on their own. So my goal is to have a garden that's 100% direct seeded by nature instead of me. That takes all my labor out of it, man, and that's a smart way to garden.
Also, is there anything else I can improve on here with my garden here?
Big question I get a lot. How can I improve my garden? Well, the number one way I say to improve your garden is through education. You know, lack of knowledge will, you know, cause a lot of issues like, you know, not hardening off your plants and not doing the proper procedures, because that's what gardening is about to a large extent, is following proper procedures. Watering procedures, you know, soil nutrient procedures, you know, how to start seed procedures. It's all procedural, and maybe that's why I'm kind of good at it, because I like procedures and, you know, doing things like in the right order so you get the good results. But nonetheless, you know, watch all my videos, subscribe to my channel, and check out old videos. You know, maybe watch one video a night that you haven't watched before to expand and learn how to grow better. That being said, besides the education, there's you know, two main nutrients that I think everybody should be using in their garden besides the soil mix that I talked about earlier. Once again, that's the compost, the coconut coir or peat moss, and vermiculite, and that's these two guys. Number one, I'm a big fan of the worm castings. So these are some AgroWin organic worm castings that I like. And this will add some of the microbial activity to your soil. In addition, another thing that's very important, of course, that I'm really big on is the azomite or rock dust, or the full spectrum of trace minerals. Whether you're going to use the azomite, the Gaia Green Glacial rock dust, which I also use another different kind of rock dust, or something like the C90 or the ocean solution, ocean grown solution that I showed in a couple episodes back. I think those are definitely could improve any garden that you put them into, hands down, without a doubt. Another thing that's very important is to include the beneficials, the microbes and the fungi in your garden. So the easiest way to do that is by some of the products that I recommend to you guys in my show. I'd recommend taking a look at my past videos. There's one entitled Lowest Delivered Prices on rock dust and compost tea, and that video is chock full of all the microbial inoculants that I recommend you guys use to get the life back in your soil, because it's not about the soil, it's about the life in your soil, right? That's the most important thing. We don't want to be using these fertilizers, 10-10-10s and all this kind of stuff, you know. We want to use, you know, and build our soils, because there is actually enough nutrients in the soils. It's just unlocking the nutrients with the microbes and with the trace minerals that basically will provide your plant the nutrition it needs, so you don't have to continually feed 10-10-10 fertilizers or 12-10-12 fertilizers like that. Because, you know, I want to get away from, you know, using fertilizers, because fertilizers don't necessarily make the soil fertile. They just keep adding fertility to it. But think about in nature, in the forest. In the forest, is there a pixie flying around sprinkling 10-10 fertilizer? No, man. The forest, it drops the leaves, the animals poop, it all composts, it all breaks down, and that's what feeds and grows these huge rainforests that are getting cut down at enormous rates that I'm not a big fan of, for things like palm oil and, you know, growing more animals that I don't think, you know, we need to eat in such mass quantities that's eaten today.
So that's all my big questions that I got for you. So hopefully you can answer them and help out a lot of people out there. I catch you at the Woodstock Fruit Festival this year. I'll see you, John. Thanks.
So, Mike, I hope that helps you. I mean, originally when I saw your Facebook post, it said, like, I lost over 100 plants. They didn't make it. I was like, oh my gosh, that's messed up, man. And then I said, hey, make a video and I'll answer it for you. But you know what? I'm glad you're gardening, glad you got your foot in the door, and glad you messed up, because by messing up, you're gonna learn exactly what you don't wanna do next time, right? You don't wanna do exactly the same thing you did to get the same results. That being said, you did do some things excellent, right? You started some tomatoes and you're a success, started over 100 tomato plants, man, that's totally amazing. And everybody could do that. Maybe you should make a video on how you did it to show with everybody so that they could do it too. And then you'll dial in how to start the tomatillos and the herbs for next time. Maybe it's too much water, maybe it's not enough water. I don't exactly know, because I'm not there. But, you know, it's great that you're starting to garden and just getting into it, because, you know, you learn as you grow. Seriously, people learn as they grow. I always encourage everybody out there to start, because without starting and without messing up, you're never going to learn how to do it properly. That being said, I encourage you all guys also to watch my videos, because I share a lot of tips that are solid on how I do things, which have worked for me, and they could also work for you. So once again, Mike, I'm super glad you're growing your gardening. This video will help you also help others that may have had this challenge or may not have even started to garden yet, to let them know that it's all right to screw up. And then to learn from your screw ups so that you don't do it again, and modify and change what you're doing so that you can have optimal success next time. And I'm so glad that pretty soon you'll be having some kick-ass tomatoes. Maybe I'll even have to visit you and eat some of your tomatoes too. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Once again, my name is John Kohler with GrowingYourGreens.com. We'll see you next time, and remember, keep on growing.